In Praise of Ignorance by Hilaire Belloc. Erasmus wrote in praise of folly. I, coming exactly 400 years after, would like to write in praise of ignorance. I would like to write a little book about it, just as he did about folly. But I am most unjustly handicapped. In the first place, I can't write what I like, because we are not free, as the men of the Renaissance were free. In the second place, I haven't the talent. Still, I can at any rate write a little article in praise of ignorance, and so, help me God, I will. Remark the scope and amplitude of the affair. Let any man, however learned he may think himself, however varied his acquaintance with men, muck, money, and the printed word, set down a list of subjects on which he could competently deal. Then let him compare it with the vast, the oceanic prospect of the things of which he knows nothing. Nor let any man be humbled by this comparison. It is a great thing to possess a true knowledge of one's own ignorance. For in a sense, you must have knowledge even to know the names of things which you do not know. As for instance, by pairs, metabolism and euticanism, isostatics and the greater lymphatics, chronology and entomology, to say nothing of apology in the sense of arguments in defense of religious doctrine, for apology to a policeman is every man's affair. You may take a list of countries of which you know the name and the shape on the map, but of themselves nothing at all. Of towns, of persons, very great persons, whose names are familiar to you, but beyond the name, nothing. To go back to theologies, examine yourself on genealogy. What were the maiden names of Charlemagne's 4 great-grandmothers? Who is the rightful King of England at the present moment? If, and here again glorious ignorance intrudes, the supposed but doubtful will of Henry VIII still have force of law? What were the claims of the Spanish Infanta to that same throne of England at the end of the 16th century? And who was the father of Zebedee's children? Anyone could write down at top speed in half an hour more points of this kind on which he knew nothing than he could write down by laborious self-examination in a whole day similar points on which he had some little knowledge. The modern system of examination, already menaced, has been very justly blamed by the wisest and the best. One of the less wise and not so good shall here say something in its favor. Anyone who has sat for an examination has had a vivid revelation of his own ignorance. I have written answers to perhaps 100 examination papers in my time, and my attitude towards each of the wretched printed things as it lay before me, I being then surrounded by dozens of other victims, each at his little desk, with an underpaid invigilator glaring at us from a platform above, was one of violent bewilderment, loss of foothold, sinking into the abyss. I would see something like this. Discuss the action of Berengarius at the Council of Blois. I knew vaguely what council meant. I had been to Blois, but beyond that, stumped. Or again, give the principal attempt at the trisection of the plane angle by the epicycloidal method. I could not do so. Or again, much more straightforward, mention in their order the places visited by St. Paul in his nth missionary journey. Nothing doing. I say that the soul receives great profit by correction of this kind. No man who has been examined but has at least come upon the knowledge of his own ignorance, which is the beginning of learning. There are some, indeed, so strong-hearted and so sane that they approach examinations daily from the very standpoint of ignorance, like those bluff travellers who, meeting the aristocracy of a foreign land, grin openly at them for mountebanks, keep their end up superbly in the vast saloons of Rome, of Warsaw, of Vienna, and go out contented with a smile yet broader than that which dignified their entrance. Of such was the young student of divinity, later possessed of a cure of souls in the Isle of Man, and quaintly affecting medieval customs. The young student of divinity who, being set a certain examination paper to test his qualifications for holy orders, read its terms very carefully and discovered that of 6 questions he was to select 3. Of those 6 questions, 1/2 meant nothing to him whatsoever. They mentioned things of which he had no more heard than had the Colossians or Ephesians or whoever they were of the first century yet heard of the Holy Ghost. But the other 3 contained each a word which he had heard before. He carefully put a little cross against each such question. They were as follows. What do you know of the Council of Chalcedon? Was Sozomen justified in his treatment of the Apollinarians? And third, what is the distinction between the Cyprianic and the Augustinian attitude towards the Western Patriarchate? He wrote each of these questions out in a fair, round, clerkly hand, leaving a little space below each. Then, in each of these spaces, he solemnly wrote, for the first answer, nothing, for the second, no, and for the third, none. Having thus completed his paper, he went up and presented it to the invigilator, bowed and walked out. The fledgling clerics around him envied the facility of his erudition, the rapidity of his completed task, his early liberation into the happy sunlight of an Oxford June. But he was ploughed. As is my most unfortunate foible in the discussion of any matter truly profound, I have allowed preliminaries to take up nearly all my space, and I have not as yet approached that chief spiritual attribute of ignorance, which is its power to flood the mind with happiness. Ignorance is a very draught of beatitude. All the mystery and marvel of a wide campaign seen from a height at evening depends on our ignorance of the nasty people by which it is inhabited, their tortuous and sordid ways. All our loves, all our hero worships, all our dreams of coming peace, all our visions of fortune are the fruits of ignorance. A man leaves a congenial company with whom he has held full communion. He goes off to take his train and thinks to have left behind him souls still vibrating in harmony with his own. They recollect him with a peaceful love. If they return to his name, it is with murmurs of approbation. He rolls home satisfied. But the root of his happiness lies deep in ignorance. For hardly had he shut the door behind him when one of them said, "Does he still drink?" And another, "Yes, but he's got to that stage when he doesn't show it." And a third, "That's the most dangerous time." Nay, to conclude upon a note of grandeur, it is by ignorance alone that we advance through the rough seas of this our mortal life. The metaphor is not original. I do not claim it so. I copy it from others. Were not men ignorant of what lay before them, no one would face the adventure. I knew one man, indeed, who was quite offensively stupid, dressed in a sort of purple grey, and had himself so groomed and set up that he looked like the successful businessman of the advertisements, which indeed he was. This man told me during a public luncheon that he had found life increasingly pleasant, and that in every fresh stage of it he discovered a further satisfaction. Now, I am glad to say that within 24 hours he was shot out of his motor car and broke upon the sacred plinths of England that prominent jaw which he had so abominably abused. Never more would he boast, or at least not without a horrid mumbling. In consideration of all this, I thank God for my own ignorance. And though it is unfortunately less than that of most people, I flatter myself it will serve.